Okay. Thank you. We have begun. I see hands up, but I'll get to that in just a few moments. I just want to say welcome to everybody to the meeting number 19, House of Commons Standing Committee. Pursuant to order reference, Tuesday, February 16th, the committee commenced consideration of Bill C-10, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and related consequential amendments to others. Just want a quick reminder for everyone, it is forbidden to take screenshots and then to share them out to the general public, to any of our guests. I'll mention that again in the second hour, but seeing our guests are from CRTC, they probably already know that already. Nevertheless, we do have we have a slew of hands up, as we say. So let's go to our
I don't know the order.
Okay, so let's go to the order I see on the screen. There you go.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Point of order.
The hands that, one of our colleagues has put up his hand before we even adjourned. I wonder if that's in order.
Oh, right, from the last meeting, you mean?
No, I just mean today, before you adjourned,
yes,
people were already putting their hands up, and I'm wondering if that's allowed or if we only can start putting our names on the list once the meeting's been adjourned.
Sorry, Ms. McPherson, I hate to interrupt. Do you mean adjourn or do you mean begin?
I mean begin. It's Friday,
okay,
Mr.
sorry.
Chair. Please be
understanding
of me.
Please don't be sorry, because there is a reason why. I'm glad you brought that up. Because in the last meeting, it was pointed out to me, and I missed it. It was that Monsieur Champoux had his hand up before I put down the gavel. So I want to apologize to him for doing that. I shouldn't have done that, and I apologize. That being said, see, don't be sorry, because I'm glad you mentioned it. So I just noticed, I didn't see what hands were up beforehand. I just looked up and saw Mr. Dung on the list that I have here, which is in order of going up. Mr. Dung, Ms. McPherson, Ms. DeBruzen.
And I was just flagging that Mr. Dung had his hand up prior to the meeting being begun.
Oh.
Chair, if I may,
one moment, please. Just give me literally 10 seconds. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, Ms. McPherson, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I didn't look at the screen before until I lowered the gavel, as it were, and looked up, and I noticed that Mr. Dong's hand was up. I have to rule on that. It's at chair's discretion, I realize that, so I have to go with that one. Mr. Dong, you had something to add.
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you very much. I move that in light of the recent reports showing that since March 2020, more than 1,100 attacks against Canadians of Asian descent have been reported, that over 500 of those attacks occurred in the first 2 months of this year alone, that children, youth, and senior are most likely to be affected by incidents of physical assault, and that is coincides with the global rise of anti-Asian racism, including the killing of 6 Asian American women in Georgia. That pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the committee undertake a study of no more than 3 meetings to review the rise of anti-Asian racism in Canada. The committee report its finding, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response. In respect of the time of our members and witness, I'm happy to defer the debate after the presentation of the witnesses.
Okay. I think I can sort of see what's coming. If normally under normal circumstances, technically, if we followed the rule, you would move to adjourn the debate because the debate follows after you move the motion. However, that being said, I like to go by consensus around this table. If there are no strong objections to leaving this to the end of the meeting, we can leave it till the end of the meeting. And I put that out as a question. I'm looking around on the Zoom lens and I don't see any dissension. So, okay, we'll move that towards the end. I hope you understand. Ms. McPherson.
I was going to table a motion, but I can do mine at the end of the meeting as well.
Okay. You can table it now if you wish.
Certainly. That pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee undertake a study on the roots of the anti-Asian racism and strategies to prevent and deter anti-Asian racism, including support and resources for victims and communities. That the committee hold at least 3 meetings to hear from witnesses. That the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 180 calendar days from the adoption of this motion. And that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response.
Okay. I asked you to do them as we first, and just to give everyone the benefit of seeing your motion before we, or getting to hear your motion before we did that. Okay.
I do believe it has been shared in both.
Yes, that's right.
Language.
Ms. DeBruzen.
I am joining the motion train and tabling my motion to also be discussed at the end of the meeting with the others. And that is that the committee extend the hours of its meetings during clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-10, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts, and hold any additional meetings required to make the necessary changes to the outdated Broadcasting Act, and move the bill to third reading at the earliest opportunity.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. DeBruzen. I'm just going to get everyone to hold on for just 2 seconds. I could consult. Yeah. So, okay, we have agreement on all 3 towards the end of the meeting. I technically need to do that to make sure. So we don't have to, I suppose technically we'd have to adjourn the meeting, but I'm asking for unanimous consent to leave it as such so we can get right away to our witness testimony. Seeing as such, okay, thanks everybody. Now we will move on to our special guests of the day. As we consider clause by clause consideration of C10, we're still with witnesses. This will be our last day of meetings with witnesses before we start the actual clause by clause. And I would like to welcome very special guests, an entity that's no stranger to this committee or others, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. I'd like to welcome Ian Scott, Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer, Scott Hutton, Chief of Consumer Research and Communications, Scott Shortliff, Executive Director of Broadcasting. We have 2 Scotts on the committee as well. If we have any more Scotts, we'll probably have our own country. Rochelle Frenette, who's General Counsel and Deputy Executive Director. Okay, so I think we're starting out with a different time. I think you requested, I think it was 10. Is it correct? First of all, I need to know who's starting. Mr. Scott, you are.
I did make the request, and I very much appreciate the committee's indulgence. And I hope the fact that we are last does not mean we are least.
No, by no means, sir. By no means. Up to 10 minutes. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having invited us to appear before your committee. We're pleased to be able to contribute to the study of Bill C-10 by this committee, and we closely followed House of Commons deliberations. However, I must tell you that the CRTC is dealing with a number of matters at this time, and we may not be able to provide detailed answers to each of your questions for the time being. The CRTC is an independent regulatory agency. Our role is to implement the legislation that Parliament adopts and ensure the policy objectives set out for the Canadian broadcasting system are achieved.
That some parliamentarians have expressed concerns that Bill C-10 proposes to give the CRTC significant latitude with regards to its implementation. And while some indeed may think too much latitude, Mr. Chair, while we understand such concerns, I would note that the current Broadcasting Act, which we've been implementing since 1991, provides the CRTC with a great deal of flexibility to determine exactly how to achieve Parliament's policy objective. That flexibility has empowered us to adapt to change and to apply different requirements to traditional television and radio services, depending on the nature of a broadcaster's service and the linguistic market in which they operate. Our regulatory frameworks have evolved in light of changing circumstances to ensure the production and promotion of French and English language content by and for Indigenous peoples, and content that showcases Canada's diversity. I would like to point out that the Broadcasting Act specifies that the broadcasting system should take into account the needs and interests of Canada's diversity. It was left to the CRTC, however, as an independent regulator to develop the necessary frameworks to achieve that policy objective, as well as others that Parliament has set out in the Act. In 2019, television broadcasters, as well as cable and satellite TV providers, contributed $2.9 billion to content creation, which included $736 million on news programming in both official languages. This was a result of requirements that the CRTC has set. Toujours en vertu de...
Also, as a result of our regulations, the large French language ownership groups must spend at least 75% of their Canadian programming expenditures on original French language content. In addition, we have set benchmarks for the number of hours of news and local programming that TV stations must air each week in both official language markets. And we have licensed Uni TV, which reflects and serves francophones outside of Quebec. Radio also plays a key role in reflecting and connecting communities. In 2019, there were over 700 commercial radio stations authorized to broadcast in Canada, offering a vast diversity of content and music. These stations contributed $46 million to the development and promotion of Canadian artists, and our regulatory frameworks have led to the licensing of APTN, the first national Indigenous broadcaster in the world, and Omni Regional, which provides multi-ethnic programming in 20 different languages. In addition to Omni, Canadians can also subscribe to more than 110 specialty and pay channels offering programming in a variety of languages other than English and French. They can also listen to numerous Indigenous and multi-ethnic radio stations. As the definition of diversity changed, we granted a license to Out TV, one of the first channels dedicated to airing content for the LGBTQ2+ community. We made these decisions because we recognized their important contributions to public policy objectives. The Broadcasting Act is now 30 years old. Although its drafters had the foresight to make it technology neutral, they could not foresee how modern technology would change the delivery of audio and audiovisual content. The CRTC has been monitoring the evolution of the Internet since its earliest days. We have held comprehensive proceedings under the current Act to consider the regulatory approach that should be taken regarding online audio and audiovisual content. Each time, we concluded that online content and its distribution was complementary to the traditional system. We therefore exempted online broadcasters from the requirement to hold a license. A lot has changed in recent years. As more Canadians gained access to high-speed internet services, they also gained access to a growing number of online libraries of domestic and foreign content. That explosion of choice was to the benefit of audiences and creators. It helped bring Canadian productions and artists to national and international audiences. The Broadcasting Act and the regulations we have implemented to achieve its policy objectives have fostered a dynamic and diverse broadcasting system. The time has come, however, to adapt to today's digital environment and to ensure we can continue to adapt to the future.
La demande du gouvernement.
At the government's request, we studied what effect this environment may have on the production, distribution, and promotion of Canadian content in the coming years. Our 2018 report found that Canadians will rely increasingly on the internet to discover and consume music, entertainment, news, and other information in the coming years. We therefore recommended in the report that future policy approaches should do the following: focus on the production and promotion of high-quality content made by Canadians from the Canadian broadcasting system, participate in an appropriate and equitable manner, and be sufficiently nimble to enable the regulator to adapt rapidly to changes in technology and consumer demand. We made similar recommendations to the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Legislative Review Panel.
All of which brings us to Bill C-10. We welcome the tabling of the bill since in our view, it does three very important things. One, it builds on the existing Broadcasting Act to clarify the CRTC's jurisdiction regarding online broadcasters. Two, it proposes provisions that specifically address our ability to obtain data from online broadcasters to better monitor their evolution. And three, it proposes to modernize the CRTC's enforcement powers. Equally important, Bill C-10 proposes to foster a more inclusive broadcasting system and more diversity in content. Once the legislation with the will of Parliament has received royal assent and the government has issued its policy direction, we will hold public hearings to develop a new regulatory framework. And there will be an opportunity for Canadians and all interested parties to provide their input and to be heard. Our goal, as always, will be to develop as complete a public record as possible and to make evidence-based decisions in the public interest. We are proud that for over 50 years, Parliament has entrusted the CRTC with the task of establishing regulatory frameworks to achieve the policy outcomes it has set out for the broadcasting system. We look forward to continue to evolve in the 21st century and to ensure that all players in the system, including online broadcasters, contribute in the most appropriate way. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Happy to answer your questions and to offer our expertise. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Well, that was pretty close to 10 minutes exactly. So let's now go to our rounds of questioning. We're going to start with the Conservative Party, Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us to answer our questions and help us to be as thorough in our report as possible. Mr. Scott, in your presentation, you said that the CRTC and Canada must adapt to the future with this new bill. However, many witnesses have been here to speak with us and said that instead we should relax regulatory obligations for Canadian broadcasting companies and undertakings instead of adding regulations to online undertakings. Mr. Geist from the University of Ottawa was one of those witnesses, saying that too rigid a regulatory structure would lead some undertakings to try and find loopholes. Mr. Pierre-Carl Pellado from Québécois, who I'm sure you know, also asked for the administrative and financial burden for traditional broadcasting companies to be relaxed. Can you tell us why that approach was not taken by the government, in your opinion? Instead, the government is adding on rules and regulations instead of simplifying things. We want to ensure that competition is healthy and that things are fair regarding online undertakings. Well, that was several questions altogether, and they are very complex questions. Perhaps I could answer in English.
There are many elements to your question. Let me start by simply indicating that the right framework. There are many interested parties. They all have a view. They all have both the public interest and their private interest in mind. The regulatory regime at the end of the day, the details of it will be set after public proceedings, after we're able to hear all stakeholders and to hear the evidence. But the starting steps are to have data about who is doing what in the sector, what are their revenues, what are their subscribers, and then we can move on to developing a regime that fulfills the objectives of the Act. I apologize if I'm not answering all of your question. Perhaps you can add to it.
Mais donc vous croyez
So you think that it's by adding regulation that we will be able to ensure fairness between traditional and digital broadcasters instead of easing regulation. Is that your view? Yes.
Use the words symmetry and equitable would be the phrases that I like to use. The obligations, I don't know if you're familiar with the 2018 report, the Harnessing Change report. One of the points we made there was that you need to design regulation that recognizes different lines of business and different nature of the business, and then to develop something that is equitable for all parties. Peut-être je peux demander à ma...
Perhaps I can call on my colleague, either Mr. Hutton or Mr. Shortliff. Could you add anything? Good day, Mr. Reyes. My name is Mr. Hutton. Yes, I think we need to look at the various stakeholders who will come before us regarding regulations. You mentioned Netflix and you mentioned... I'm going to stop you. It's not about what those people said. There was also a professor who testified. I want to know your opinion on the approach of either regulatory easing or more regulations. Do you think that by adding regulations we will have more fairness, or do you think it's by easing regulations that we will achieve that fairness? I don't want you to add stakeholders. Okay. Well, the Commission's opinion and our contribution to the legislative review panel was we need an approach that gives us the flexibility to ensure a different regulatory approach that seems appropriate, flexible, and adaptable. We understand that existing stakeholders also need to be competitive in the changing environment, so regulations need to be adapted to them. And we are always looking for better ways for foreign players to contribute to the Broadcasting Act's objectives. Perfect. So there's one model or the other, but we're looking to strike the balance between the best of those two. Some broadcasting experts told us they had doubts about the constitutionality of Bill C-10. Could you comment on that? Do you think they're correct to be concerned? We could call on our General Counsel, Rachel. Thank you for the question. What I can tell you is that we took note of the Department of Justice correspondence on Bill C-10 and regarding the constitutionality of the bill. Did you yourself give the CRTC's opinion? We have looked through the bill and we have kept ourselves apprised of all legal opinions on the bill. Thank you. Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
You have like a few seconds left if you just want to concluding remarks.
Merci.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure that my colleagues will ask more questions about the place of French in Canadian content later. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your comments on that because we have heard many concerns from various stakeholders.
Now you're officially over time. My apologies. Now we're going to go to Monsieur Lewis, dans la circonscription.
In his riding. Welcome.
6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and your advocacy. I would address my questions to Mr. Scott only because then I'll let you parse it out to whomever you think might be able to answer it, and I appreciate it. We have heard both sides of the story about regulatory obligations between traditional broadcasters. Should they be reduced, or should we enhance the obligations for online broadcasting? But specifically, I appreciate you talking about modernizing the enforcement, allowing more diversity, and the timelines for public consultation. So could you add on to what you were saying previously or in your opening statement about the way that, the timeline, and if we can get this legislation passed quickly, what your timeline is for public consultation, and when you see that happen?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. There's, I guess, at the end of the day, the timelines will be set, if I understand correctly, through a policy direction to be issued by government to the CRTC. And based on the public documents and the comments of the ministry, they have asked us to be able to implement a number of major measures, important measures, in a 9-month period, and then there's a longer 2-year period. And obviously, if issued such a policy direction, we'll fulfill it. I'll be very frank with you. We have been working very hard internally at the CRTC in order to prepare for the day, if it's the will of Parliament, to pass this legislation into law, it'll be important that we are able to start immediately and issue relevant notices or bulletins, and the public proceedings would follow on very quickly after that.
No, I appreciate that, yes, because as many people as we have heard from thus far, I know that having public hearings to provide that regulatory framework will be most welcome. And as more people understand what we're going through, the more voices we have, which is fantastic, and it fits into your diversity. And I know that in the meantime, you're also collecting that data. If I could change pace and then talk about, there's a difference in online streamers investing money for jobs in the cultural sector, which is important and is productive for our creative class and for our economy, and investing in Canadian stories and in Canadian content. And I want to make sure that we can continue to support and promote those Canadian stories and the creators and the programming. So do you anticipate, reasonably requiring a significant level of Canadian content obligations from those online streamers, and what challenges would we face in those endeavors?
So the short answer is yes. And, the essence of CRTC regulation is about the production, the distribution, and the discovery or accessibility of Canadian content. And in that sense, when I say Canadian content, I mean content that's reflective of Canada and its values. And it is fully our expectation that will continue. The online providers are no different in many respects than others. They'll pursue good stories. We have a role to play in defining, perhaps redefining for regulatory purposes, what constitutes Canadian content. You noted there's an increased focus on diversity and an increased focus on on Indigenous peoples. And those will form a part of it. But the short answer is yes, there is a regulatory regime to be developed that will both ensure that economic activity you mentioned, but as well as ensure the production of Canadian content in the sense that you described.
I appreciate you saying that, because a number of witnesses have come forward, and that's what something the Broadcasting Act has always been able to preserve, is our own voices, and now our voices being even more diverse. That's really important. In my time, one more question. One of the issues we're working on is to strike that balance between legislation and regulation, and and we need make sure that we make those decisions now, that they'll stay relevant. You mentioned that in your opening statement. As technology changes and new formats become viable, we don't want to be updating this legislation every few years, and it's overdue now. So just as streaming has emerged to compete with traditional broadcasting, what do you see as the challenges of keeping up to whatever technology advances that we'll experience as a nation? And in your opinion, how can we balance that constant push and pull between legislation and regulation?
Thank you for the question. And I think the key is that you put the important policy principles in legislation, because as you know, it is difficult to go and change fundamental structural legislation, and you leave the details to, with respect, the expert regulator, along with policy direction powers. We've emphasized both in our earlier reports, and I'm happy to do so today, that the CRTC needs to be more nimble and flexible. We need to be able to adapt to changing technology, both today's and tomorrow's. And I think that is best achieved by letting us hold public proceedings and establish a framework that can be changed as required as technology and commercial services evolve.
I appreciate you saying that. Just in the rest of my time, thank you. And like you said, between public consultation and between the data that we're collecting, I hope to give you the tools you need to carry us forward. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr.
Chapu, for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My goodness, I feel like I have to run a marathon in 6 minutes. I have so many things to ask. There are concerns about teeth in this bill regarding original French language content. Some concerns are that these regulations should be included in the bill and not determined by the CRTC later. Do you prefer to have more latitude when it comes to the interpretation of the provisions and the intention of the law? I'm thinking particularly of the linguistic component. Thank you for the question. That is a very important question. I'm very pleased to tell of it. The CRTC has been regulating the broadcasting sector since 1968 and has been responsible for the regulatory framework that exists today that ensures the important place of original French language content in our system in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada. You can rest assured that as the CRTC comes up with a different framework, French content will remain a priority. Mr. Hutton, would you like to add anything? Yes. To answer your direct question, do we want the directives to be clearer or vaguer? I think that's not the question. I think that what we're trying to put forward is we want you as parliamentarians to be clear on your intentions, but leave the regulatory responsibility and flexibility to us so that we are free to adapt and change them. Excuse me for interrupting you, Mr. Hutton. If it is left relatively vague and we give you the essence in general, the concern is that you would be not at the mercy of, but you would be vulnerable to pressure if we are not very specific in the place that should be given to Francophone culture in this law. C10 amends and enhances the existing law in a number of respects. As our president said, the CRTC is working with a number of policies we have in place. For example, we have various regimes in place for whether they be Anglophone or Francophone, regarding Canadian content. We, over the past years, have even added measures regarding Francophone content. I do not feel that the CRTC is moving backwards when it comes to Francophone content. The existing law gives priority to Francophone content in the country. I would like to speak to a different subject. We heard from the minister and officials from the Department of Heritage recently, and they said that we also heard from Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, who are telling us that, contrary to what the minister said, social media are not covered by this bill. Do you think the CRTC can impose regulations on social media? Just one moment. I'm looking for
broadcaster. Alors, if we separate those two concepts, to use Facebook as an example, if Facebook is you're sharing, your neighborhood information about your neighborhood, then it's not broadcasting. But if Facebook is putting on a Montreal Canadiens hockey game or engaged in other broadcasting aspects, then they would be subject to our regulation.
Donc, je comprends bien.
So if
we have a problem with the French interpretation.
Oui, effectivement.
1 second. 1 second. We're going to have to fix this first before we proceed. You have about 1 minute and 20 seconds left, Monsieur Champoux. If you could just give us 1 moment.
Ou je pouvais répéter en français.
I could repeat it in French, Mr. Champoux. Well, we can wait for interpretation. Thank you very much.
Okay. We need someone to speak in English. That'll be me for now, I guess, since I'm the chair. It's quite. We're good? Okay, great. You have 1 minute and 20 seconds, Monsieur Champoux.
Parfait.
Perfect. I'll continue. You used a term earlier. You mentioned symmetry. And I must say, I like that very much. Do you believe you have the necessary tools right now to achieve that equilibrium between foreign online undertakings and traditional broadcasters, if the bill is passed? At this time, no, but after C10, I believe we will have the tools we need. And do you think it's possible to build on Mr. Reyes' question? Do you think you have the tools? Or what can you say about traditional broadcasters asking for regulatory easing so that they can be more agile? Do you think it's possible to ease those regulations and preserve the fairness in the industry, especially with regard to Francophone content? The short answer is yes. I do have confidence we have the tools. Thank you very much. You rose to your challenge. Thank you very much.
6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. This has been very interesting to hear your responses, and of course, we all have a great deal of interest in the work that you're doing and what the implications of C10 will be on your work. As everyone knows, if passed, Bill C10 would require online businesses, both foreign and Canadian, to contribute financially to the Canadian broadcasting system to support creators and producers of Canadian content. What are some of the ways you think companies will try to get around their future spending or royalty obligations? And what do you think you could do to prevent that from happening?
Well, we're in the business of regulation, so I think we're probably used to parties, stakeholders interpreting our rules. I wouldn't ever accuse them of trying to circumvent them, but perhaps interpret them in a way that they believe is consistent with the rules, but to their advantage. Honestly, I will say that our task will be to develop a new framework that is reflective of the various business lines of business, both traditional and emerging. And in a win-win situation, that framework should incentivize behavior, not just prescribe it. So it shouldn't be only thou shalt do this or that, but also give them reason to follow our rules. And I'm confident that we can develop such a framework based on the evidence that we'll gather from all parties. So I'm not evading the question, but I think we can develop a framework that will be a win-win for Canadian culture and the broadcasting sector and for the participants in the marketplace.
So incentivizing, I think, is a great idea, and I applaud you for that. But I also recognize that you acknowledge that for a lot of companies, incentivizing may not be enough to keep them on the right side of the line, I guess.
Which means it will need a thou shalt do things as well. There will need to be prescriptive rules as well as incentives.
The stick and the carrot, of course.
Yes.
What methodology and criteria will you use to define an online company, and how will you decide which ones will be required to either spend or pay royalties to fund Canadian content?
I have to be careful in how I respond to that. This is looking at a future regulatory environment, and it wouldn't be right for me to predict what it will look like. That should come after we hold a public proceeding and we hear the evidence and develop the record. So I need to be careful not
Perhaps
to say,
if I framed it as what you would like to see.
One that achieves the objectives that I mentioned earlier. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer it beyond saying that we would ensure. You really have me stumped in terms of what I can say about a prospective regulatory framework without hearing about it, 9 months from now, saying you said before a committee that it would include, X or Y. I'll repeat what I said earlier, that it really can be a combination of incentives and prescriptive rules.
And I'm just wondering, as you develop this and as we are looking, you go through this policy, will there be models operated by other countries that you either have been looking at, will look at, and if you could comment on which countries, which models, and why?
We have been studying it. Needless to say, these aren't new issues to us. We're very pleased legislation has been proposed. The challenges brought about by new players have been obviously going on for some time. We have been studying various approaches taken by regulators around the world, but I would say we truly need a made in Canada solution. We are unique. We are unique in that we have a bilingual broadcasting system. We have to reflect Indigenous peoples. And we are the next door neighbor to the world's most powerful content creator. And so the English language market in Canada is particularly impacted by the proximity to the United States. So the short answer is it'll be made in Canada, but we certainly do study quite carefully the various approaches taken to content regulation around the world.
Can you give us an example of just one or two of the countries that you have been looking at and that you've been taking as some lessons from?
I mean, there are a number of leading regulators that we have very regular contact with. We certainly look at what Australia does. We look at what France does in the promotion of culture in particular. They have a very strong regulatory regime. We look at the UK. They have done some interesting work. They have a large, strong public broadcaster as well. So those would be three examples.
Thank you. Well, and I know that I am running out of time, but I want to thank you for your time today, and I look forward to hearing back about how the consultations go, assuming C10 goes forward. Mr. Chair, I pass back to you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson, and you will get a second chance to because we're going to do a second round. I'm going to be strict on time, folks. We've got 4 questioners, 5, 5, 2.5, 2.5, which gives us 15. Now let's go to Mr. Waugh for 5 minutes, please.
Well, I want to thank all 4 from the CRTC with us here today. And I just want to ask you a question, if you don't mind, Mr. Scott, being the chair. We've heard some that say, actually, today you have the power to regulate the streamers like Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon. Do you have that authority here today in 2021 to regulate it?
It's an interesting question. Thank you. And I'm going to give a heads up to my legal counsel that she may want to add to my answer. The fact of the matter is that today, as we read the Broadcasting Act, we have regulation over all programming, and programming is very widely defined. And the commission has looked at, I think 3 times in total, dating back 20 years ago, at whether or not it would be desirable to regulate or necessary to regulate content delivered over the internet. And in the past, the commission has concluded that regulating it would not meaningfully contribute to the broadcasting system. Now the world has changed. As I said in my opening remarks, I think the extent, the volume, the significance of over-the-top programming makes that not the case today. So we have exemption orders in place that require them not to be licensed, but they do fall under our jurisdiction. If that's not.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I know a lot of former broadcasters that now are on Facebook doing an hour show. They're selling commercials. They're not licensed. And here they are. They're actually competing against traditional broadcasters. And it's just a free-for-all on Facebook and other social media. And I just wonder why we can't control this in this country. And do you have the capacity, once this bill passes, to control this and to force these people to have licenses? Because they're taking in much revenue, a lot of them are, and it's just a boondoggle right now, to be honest with you. It's a free-for-all out there.
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the 3 key things for me about the legislation, number 1 in my list of 3 was it brings greater clarity or certainty over our regulatory authority over all players involved in broadcasting. So that again, that's the short answer. So yes, with the passage of this legislation, with the addition of the ability to gather data so we know who's doing what, and the necessary enforcement tools, I do believe we'll have the tools we require to effectively regulate the broadcasting sector.
There are some, the Department of Heritage, of course, gave this $830 million that they think they can generate by 2023. Did they ever sit down with you and ask about that? Where did they get the number? And did they talk about the calculation of that with your, I know you're a regulator, but where did the calculation method come from?
Well, I think, I hope I'm not misunderstanding. I think when the department appeared, they provided an explanation of how they developed the number. No, as you point out, we're an arm's length regulator, and we have an arm's length relationship with the department. So we didn't provide them. They have the same data available to them as do we. As to what is the number, I don't know, and I'm going to revert back to my answer to Ms. McPherson, and I hope it doesn't sound tired for all of you, that if I were to predict that today, I would be closing my eyes or closing my mind to whatever we hear based on evidence in the future. So I don't want to predict what it would be. We will gather data, and we will develop a regulatory framework, and then based on that, we will find equitable contributions from among the various broadcasting players.
Does the CRTC today have the capacity to do this? There's many in the conventional side that says right now you're overworked. And now this is coming forward. What will it take to get you up to speed as a regulator to tackle the whole bill and move on?
Am I going to be able to employ you to assist me when I have to go to Treasury Board? Look, we are busy. My team works incredibly hard in the public interest. We will need some additional resources, and the ministry is aware of that and will support request to Treasury Board for the necessary resources.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Ms. Ian, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Merci beaucoup, and thank you to our witnesses that have joined us here today. Mr. Scott, going to direct this to you, but as you see fit, please feel free to involve others on your team, and thank you to your team for being here as well. You have talked about the need for equitable solutions. Depending on who you hear from, the CRTC is given too much power in this bill or too little power in this bill to regulate the online streamers, to come to some sort of equitable solution. Just trying to drill down here, in your opinion, from the Commission's perspective, what is your biggest challenge?
It's a wonderful question, and maybe I can I don't think I did a very good job of answering Mr. Rioux at the beginning in response to his very first question. Look, to be honest, I'll say two things. First is we're a regulator, and what we do by definition is we make those difficult decisions. Our job is to balance competing, conflicting sometimes parties and measures, and to reach an equitable, fair outcome. And I think that's exactly what we will have to do as we balance the various pros and cons of different regulatory approaches. Short answer to your question, I think the hardest thing we will face is defining what is equitable. When you say, okay, to a traditional broadcaster, I'm making something up, we want in particular a focus on news, or we want in particular a focus on original French language programming. How will that compare to an OTT provider simply giving money, contributing financially, but not in terms of actually developing or distributing Canadian stories? So it'll be the different lines of business, the different things they bring to the market, and how one reaches a determination about what is equitable. I'm being very candid, but that I think will be the biggest challenge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott. Another question for you. I believe it was in response to my colleague, Monsieur Champoux, but you said that French content will remain priority. Through that lens, with that in mind, how likely is it that there will be no French obligations on, say, Netflix?
Well, so let me answer it in two ways. First, I can assure you that there will be no less focus on the production of original French language content. It forms a critical and important part of our broadcasting system and will continue to do so in the future. I go back to my answer, and I apologize if it's tiresome. I'm not going to try and predict what it would be, but there would be a number of approaches one could take. As I just mentioned, in certain instances, it might be if you can't produce a particular kind of content, then we're going to take money and give it to someone who can produce that content. There are a number of ways to attain the end objective, but I'd like to reiterate that the end objective will not change and will not be undermined in terms of a future CRTC regulatory model. Original French language production will hold a pride of place in the system.
Mm-hmm. And bearing in mind that you are, a regulator, you've spoken a lot about diversity, the need for diversity in Canadian content. We have heard from several organizations from the community broadcaster base, mm-hmm. and they are very concerned they have been left out of this bill. How important is that, in your opinion, that community piece? And the community piece, I should say, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Scott, before you start, that often does represent the diverse aspect of this country.
It can and does in many cases, and official language minority communities are an important part. We actually have a good system in terms of official language minority community. We meet with them regularly, but that's not really the root of your question. As to the place in the Act, again, I'll go back to, I think the Act needs to set out the policy objective. And with respect, it should best be left to us to develop the regulatory regime and to act on the policy direction that will ensure that the system reflects Canada's ethnic diversity and other forms of diversity.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I'm sorry, I cut it right there. We're really short on time. Mr. Champoux.
Mr. Champoux, for 2.5 minutes, please. I'll be quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Scott, on Monday, public calls will end regarding commercial broadcasting. We are studying a revision of the Broadcasting Act. Don't you think that this study on commercial radio are premature? Shouldn't we wait for the conclusion of C10? That really is a question for you, for members of Parliament, not for us. But you do still have your agenda to manage. I imagine you have many files open at this time. How can you prioritize? Will you be able to start it later? Go ahead, please. Thank you, Ian. Yes, Mr. Champoux, that is a question we are constantly asking ourselves. I think that what my president was trying to say was that we're at the beginning of potentially changing an existing act when it comes to music and content, Anglophone and Francophone across the country. It is a difficult situation, and there were some publications that were made public yesterday regarding Indigenous content. These are important aspects. We have a framework, and we need to make sure the framework works together with what we have existing now. Your decisions on C10 will have a great impact on our next steps, but essentially, we must move forward and modernize these environments with structural change, and not only structural change, but we also need to consider the effects of the pandemic. We can't ignore those. We still need to move forward with our work. Thank you very much.
Now, I have a note. Ms. McPherson, you are graciously handing your time to Mr. Manley. Is that correct? Excellent. Okay, Mr. Manley of the Green Party. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the honourable member from Edmonton as well for sharing time for me to ask questions. My questions are around CanCon rules. They haven't changed in decades, and we see a different paradigm now with people producing for these larger platforms. As we're looking at regulating these platforms, I'm wondering whether the CRT is examining how we can change CanCon rules, and also the access to the Canadian Media Fund and the tangible benefits policy. What are the things that the CRTC is examining in terms of these producers who don't fit the typical broadcast model, working with the traditional broadcasters?
So there's a couple of elements there, but I'll try and answer them in turn quickly. So with the new legislation, if passed by Parliament, we will have to develop or potentially develop or amend the current definitions to Canadian content. And we would look at that. That's separate than, for example, Canadian content for purposes of CAVCO, like funding issues, and those are different things and not subject to our regulation. We're responsible for broadcasters, but clearly we need to develop a regulatory definition of Canadian content if we are to require new players and existing licensees to produce something that fits that standard.
Ian, may I add something?
Yes, please, Scott.
Just on the CMF. So the CMF is independent. It has its own board of directors. It has a contribution agreement with the Department of Canadian Heritage. What we do is we say that money can be directed towards the CMF. We could also direct money towards other funds that were created. So we do not tell the CMF how they should spend their money. We are, of course, in touch with them. In terms of tangible benefits, that's very much related to acquisitions and mergers, which in the broadcast field is happening less and less because it's become such a vertically integrated field. So with the CMF and tangible benefits, those would fall under us looking at a broader content policy and then going back to the question of how do we best achieve our objectives and what does that mean for how we direct money in the system? So is there a definitive plan to look at those issues right at the moment? No. Are they contextual for how we will achieve our broader policy objectives as we move forward? Absolutely.
Okay, just another quick question. We've seen a real erosion in the funding and the access for community television and community radio, in particular community television, with the cable companies moving their money into programming rather than, and they're vertically integrated, so that's perfect for them. They're actually padding a fund that works for them. Is there any plan to solidify this community element to ensure that we get community voices and diversity of voices in our communities? Because that part of the broadcast system is so important for local communities.
Understood. And I think maybe at the root of the question is a decision that was made by the Commission some years ago. And it allowed cable operators, broadcast distribution undertakings, to divert part of the funding, if they wish to, from community programming to local news. And it wasn't, as you put it, to their direct benefit. It was to produce local news. And
Sorry.
as regulators, we have to make difficult choices sometimes, and that was one, as between news and community programming.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We have to end it there, and I want to thank our guests for graciously coming along from the CRTC. Mr. Scott, Mr. Hutton, Mr. Shortlift, Madame Frenette, we thank you for your time. We're going to try to turn this around quickly, folks, for our next guest, because we have business at the end, and we'll adjourn for a few minutes. And once again, thank you to our guests. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Someone yelled at me. I should probably say suspend. I've only been at this 16 years. My apologies. So let's suspend for a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you all for your questions.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. The second part of our witness testimony today, as someone pointed out in the interregnum, we now are embarking upon our final witnesses before we commence clause by clause. I want to welcome for the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, someone who's no stranger to this committee, Ms. Edwards, Catherine Edwards, Executive Director, and with her, her special guest who's the Executive Director of the Community Radio Fund of Canada, Mr. Alex Friedman. Second witness we have from the Professional Music Publishers Association, Jérôme Payette, who is the Executive Director as well. So both groups get up to 5 minutes for introductory remarks, and Ms. Edwards, we're going to start with you. 5 minutes, please.
Thanks so much for inviting us. As you said, I'm Catherine Edwards with Cactus. Cactus
advocates for access to digital skills training, production support, and distribution platforms so that individuals and communities can express themselves in the digital environment.
Alex?
Mr. Friedman, you're on mute. Sorry.
Old mute problem. Thank you so much. So my name's Alex Friedman, and of course, I'm the Executive Director of the Community Radio Fund of Canada. So we collaborate with all three community radio associations, and with us and Cactus, there are about 250 member radio and television stations. And together we're speaking with the same voice. We're looking for greater recognition to specify and specificity regarding the role of community broadcasters in the Broadcasting Act. Now, it's important to recognize that there are more than 100 Indigenous community broadcasters that also make up the community aspect of the Broadcasting Act, but we do acknowledge that currently most of those broadcasters are not members of our organizations.
So community-owned and operated radio and TV stations, and many of which are evolving into multimedia innovation hubs, are answerable to community-elected boards. Most have government oversight through CRTC licensing or participation in programs such as the Local Journalism Initiative. They're led by professionals who train and coordinate community members and local organizations, producing content for a fraction of the cost of public and private broadcasters. They arise from local aspirations, passion, and effort, and they're there for the long haul. They stand between the fake news of the unregulated internet on the one hand and public and private broadcasting on the other, which serve communities with populations over 100,000. We serve rural, remote, and northern communities, some with as few as 500 households, as well as minorities in urban settings.
And we also employ more than 1,000 staff members across the country. We provide media training to 20,000 volunteers. We broadcast in as many as 80 different languages, including 20 different Indigenous languages, and produce more than 1 million hours of local Canadian-produced content every year. And the need for a robust community broadcasting system has never been greater. Commercial broadcasters are emptying newsrooms. We've seen this with Bell and HuffPo recently as their business models struggle to adapt to the digital competition. And the result is a lack of local representation, which serves to undermine fundamentally our democracy. Community broadcasters, we have an incredibly important role in ensuring diversity and access for Indigenous and minority language communities. We offer them training and infrastructure to tell their stories. And in fact, we're the training ground for the large majority of Canada's future broadcasters. Community broadcasters are the creative hubs supporting Creative Canada policy framework, ensuring that we can compete internationally by providing low-risk platforms where talent, best, and new ideas get their chance to evolve. Community radio is also where most emerging Canadian artists get played first. And Mrs. Ian asked the CRTC an important question about how diversity will be maintained. And unfortunately, once again, we hear the response, leave it to us, we're going to get it done. But therein lies the problem. It's been left to the CRTC for generations. And because of a lack of definition of our role, we have been really out of many of these conversations. And so our first ask is that we fulfill our potential by accessing more recognition within the Broadcasting Act for our not-for-profit role.
So while more than 200 community radio stations did survive Canada's digital transition, cable community TV has not, as Mr. Manley and Ms. McPherson queried. Cable ownership and technical consolidation have led to the closure of the majority of the 300 former cable studios, which launched the careers of a whole generation of Canadian talent, people like Dan Aykroyd, Mike Myers, and Guy Madden. In 2016, as Mr. Scott acknowledged, the CRTC gave cable companies the green light to redirect most of Canada's $150 million community TV budget from their few remaining corporately branded stations, so Rogers TV, Shaw TV, TV Cogeco, to their failing news properties. Cactus members are trying to fill this gap, but despite our cost efficiency, it still takes seed funding for infrastructure and leadership to reach news deserts. The communities that need community media the most tend to have the least capacity to fund them.
So I'd like to take an opportunity to highlight the Local Journalism Initiative, which is the first federal program to recognize community-owned and operated media. For an investment of just $1.6 million, our members have extended high-quality civic news coverage to almost 60 communities this year alone. The CBC stations receive an average of $16 million per station from federal funding, while community stations' average budget of about $150,000. Our role in Canadian broadcasting is critical, but the support is not there. This can, however, be addressed. So our first proposal is that there must be a definition in the Act of community media which recognizes our not-for-profit and our community-based structure.
Second, we request, sorry, my screen just jumped. These touchpads. Second, we request a description of our role, so equivalent to that accorded to the CBC. We suggest as low-hanging fruit to substitute community media for alternative programming services in Section 3.1R of the 1991 Act. This section was never used, but it almost exactly describes how community media reflect underserved groups. And third, the Creative Canada Policy Framework, the Shattered Mirror, and the Yale Report barely mention the community element. Policymakers need guidance in the Act regarding how we complement public and private broadcasting in fulfilling the Act's goals. This is the piece the CRTC hasn't gotten. For example, in Sections 3.1.0 and P, we underscore the role of community media in enabling Indigenous and disabled persons to craft their own content. We provide suggested wordings for these amendments in our brief.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I'm going to have to ask you to clue up. If you've got a sentence left, go for it.
Yeah, there's one sentence. We just wanted to conclude with a quote from the CRTC's 2011 report, Shaping Regulatory Approaches for the Future. They said long-term approaches to ensuring the prominence and quality of Canadian production may increase the importance of public and community broadcasters as instruments of public policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Payette.
Mr. Payette, for 5 minutes, please. Yes, hello, Chairman, committee members. First, thank you for inviting me to testify before you on this bill, which will be crucial for the future of our culture. The Professional Music Publishers Association, or APAM, represents Quebec and Francophone music publishers in Canada. Our members control 830 publishing companies and approximately 400,000 musical works. As partners of songwriters and composers, music publishers support the creation of musical works, promote them and administer them, and intervene in all contexts ranging from paper scores to online music services, including audio-visual productions, concerts, and video games. I would like to point out that our association is a member of the Coalition for the Diversity of Cultural Expressions and supports its proposed amendments to the bill. I am testifying at the end of the process. Several subjects important to us have already been brought up with you, so I will bear that in mind. The bill must be amended to meet cultural objectives and passed quickly. Canada's broadcasting legislation has been pursuing much the same objective for nearly 100 years. Inaudible for the interpreter. That is, for citizens to have access to our content in order to preserve our identity and culture. To avoid global cultural uniformization, we must think globally and act locally. Canada must protect the diversity of its cultural expressions, especially the French language. To take our place in the world, we must have our own identity and a vibrant culture. Through its history, Canada has taken bold steps, such as adopting radio quotas, which were later copied around the world. I invite you to carry on that tradition, whose objectives are still as important as ever. We need you to work together so that a bill favorable to our culture can be passed quickly. We need to level the playing field, not deregulate. The current legislative and regulatory system exists because market forces cannot guarantee the survival of Canadian culture, particularly Francophone culture. This is largely a demographics problem, in addition to the fact that we're located just north of the country that exports its culture the most. This reality has not changed when new technologies have appeared. On the contrary, it has been exacerbated. Our cultural industries are fragile. They emerged thanks to a series of measures, including the Broadcasting Act. If the legislative environment were no longer favorable, our cultural industries could disappear or no longer reach Canadians. The current situation is unfair to traditional broadcasters. It is true. However, regulatory relief would not enable them to gain back the advertising revenues and listeners that they've lost to online broadcasters. The level of regulation for traditional broadcasters has nothing to do with the changing habits of Canadians. Foreign companies must contribute to our culture and identity as traditional broadcasters do. We need to race to the top. Not doing so would be tantamount to deregulating, which would be tragic for our culture. We need to be visionary and not exclude social media from the act. I listened carefully to testimony by the minister and officials on March 8th, and I am not at all reassured. For it not to be outdated as soon as it is passed, the law must cover all businesses that broadcast professional cultural content without exception. YouTube is the most popular online music service in Canada, and I am talking about YouTube, not YouTube Music, which are not to be confused. With C10's current provisions, Spotify or Cube Music would be regulated for broadcasting a song, while YouTube would not be regulated for broadcasting the same song, which would be unfair. The term user-generated content is imprecise, and C10 is attempting to define a perilous process of uploading. It is the content that is important, not the process of putting it online. The law must be neutral with respect to technological processes. With the text of C10, a song or video posted online by industry professionals or self-produced professional artists would escape the law. Contrary to what Mr. Ripley told you, distinguishing professional cultural content from amateur video is not difficult. YouTube already distinguishes professional music content from its entire repertoire using metadata. The means of distribution will continue to evolve, as will the business models, and people will continue to listen to music and watch videos. The fundamental question is, will people still consume our culture? You must ensure the answer is yes. In conclusion, we need you to work together to amend and adopt a new C10 that will establish fair obligations for all businesses operating in Canada by leveling the playing field so as to avoid destroying the cultural sector, particularly the music sector. Our culture needs you. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you, Mr. Payette.
Go to questions, and we had a change earlier, but I don't know if it applies now. Am I going to Mr. Aitchison or Mr. Shields by show of hand? Mr. Shields, for 6 minutes, please, to start our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate it. Mr. Payette, in all of the witnesses we had, and you have briefly mentioned it, is my granddaughter told me this morning she paid $80 for a video game that she can play with her brothers in other cities. Tell us a little bit about the video, because I think we haven't heard that much about it. Tell us about those people in Canada working on production of video for games.
Les jeux vidéo.
Video games. Well, our members represent musical works that are used in video games. And I believe they are excluded from Bill C-10. That's my understanding of the text. It's not contained. They are not contained in Bill C-10.
Huge, growing part of the industry in the sense of what I listen to younger people, the sports that we have connected with it. So how big of a part of the industry is it that has been ignored under this act?
Les jeux vidéo.
Well, it's true that video games is a sizable industry, but I don't think they're considered traditional broadcasting undertakings that would have been regulated as broadcasters. But you're right that this is an important issue.
As I see this growing industry in the sense, and we have producers who can provide music for it, I think that is a significant piece that we've missed. Because when I listen to youth and what they're doing, this is an extreme part of their life.
Absolument, je suis d'accord.
Absolutely. I agree. Video games are important. Maybe one day the Broadcasting Act should include video games. But for us, reestablishing the scope of the law when it comes to all companies operating online, including social media, would already be positive for us.
Thank you. To Mr. Friedman, when you talk about three specific things between you and Ms. Edwards, what is the most important out of those three? If you were to say, how do we move this ahead? Because I understand what the local is, local radio, local TV, because I remember 30, 40 years ago when it exploded and then it all disappeared on the TV side, the cable piece. What's the most important thing out of those three recommendations?
I think, from our perspective, the most important thing, and thank you for the question, is recognition within the Act. Right now, when the conversation happens around the Broadcasting Act, there are three pillars. There's commercial, there's public, and there's community broadcasting. Unfortunately, in that conversation, community broadcasting is very frequently left by the wayside. Billions of dollars are spent supporting public broadcasters, and there's a number of production firms that support a number of commercial broadcasters, but community media is left off the table. And what we're looking for is recognition within the Act. We are a nonprofit structure. We're a community-based structure. To your previous question, we support the production and the growth of new music providers. Wherever they go on to take their career, be it video games or wherever, we're the place where all of these people get their chance to begin. And unfortunately, we're not recognized in the Broadcasting Act, and there isn't a recognition of the role we play. And I think that that's really, from our perspective, where we need to see a focus.
What does recognition in the Act mean to you?
A definition of what we do, a recognition that we play a critical role in terms of promoting multilingual in a variety of different aspects of the Broadcasting Act. There are a number of important goals set out in C10 that we support wholeheartedly. The inclusion of Indigenous broadcasters. Again, we're really one of the only places where Indigenous languages are heard in these communities. And we're one of the only places where they have a chance to get on the air. And so the fact that we are not recognized within the Broadcasting Act, we see the Yale report come through with nothing but a scant mention of the role of community broadcasters. The fact that we're there puts us in a position to have conversations with the CRTC about making sure we get funding for these roles and making sure that we have a place at the table. And that's what's really critical.
As you mentioned that, as we know the model for traditional, in the sense of broadcasting, that it's not the news that makes the money, it's the advertising. So yours is based on sponsorship.
Sponsorship and some level of advertising. There's no question that we do have we support in many ways the small and medium enterprise advertising. We offer to these local businesses the ability to communicate with their constituencies at a fraction of the cost of commercial broadcasters. So we do have some element of advertising revenue that's critical. Unfortunately, the reality is that this is also the segment of our economy that has been hardest hit by the pandemic. And so as we've seen commercial broadcasters grow their role and return to increased funding, we're not seeing that in our advertisers. But we do have a certain role for the advertising. I see Ms. Edwards has something to add.
I just wanted to elaborate. You said, what's the most important thing? The three things that we want, which we spelled out on our brief, which some suggested wording. As Alex said, the first thing is a clear definition that this not-for-profit sector exists. Secondly, what's the role that we're doing? So one flows out of the other. And then, as he said, we're always overlooked in reports. I think even with a definition, people don't necessarily know how we function in the real world. There's a lot of other clauses in the Act where our role could be mentioned. And as Alex says, a good example is if we really want to serve Indigenous communities so they can do in the language programming, some of them are as small as 400 or under 1,000 band members. If they're really going to get in the language programming, the only way that's going to happen is through community media. Get it in the community media center, hire someone to teach the kids, teach the elders how to make production, and boom, they can make whatever they want.
What is your relationship with the Indigenous Broadcasting Organization?
So some of them well, they don't have a single national community media association. Although, for example, we've discussed with the Assembly of First Nation before. They told us at one point they ballparked 60 community radio broadcasters, Indigenous ones. Although my board member from Saskatchewan says there's over 50 in Saskatchewan alone. So some of them are our members. So we have one in Manitoulin Island that is in the local journalism initiative, for example. Mississippi Broadcasting in Northern Saskatchewan is a member. So we're becoming aware of them and they're becoming aware of us slowly. And they're becoming aware, I think, that by joining together, we get a stronger voice like Alex and I are doing today.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Madame Bessette.
Ms. Bessette, for 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being with us today. I would like to speak to our guests from Cactus. We heard testimony from public and private players in the broadcasting industry, but I think the community aspect is perhaps less well known. Could you tell us more about the role community media play in Canada, particularly for rural regions like my own? The three biggest roles that we mentioned and that Alex mentioned during our presentation is the localness. So the private and public sectors are in more populated areas of over 100,000 people. These are sizable communities. We serve small, tiny communities, even 500 population communities, whether they be a remote to the north, whether they be Indigenous communities or rural. Secondly, we give a voice to diversity. So even in urban settings, there is a need for television, for community television and radio, because we give a voice to minorities, whether that be official language minorities or even just groups with different interests like the LGBTQ group, etc. And thirdly, we are a platform to launch new careers, to build up digital skills, to learn how to fill out a tax form. It's hard to learn how to do the processes that need to be done as a non-profit organization and how to use the tools necessary. So those three things: local, diversity, and training in digital skills. Thank you very much. You also represent the nonprofit community aspect. Is there a for-profit community aspect? Well, at this time, in the past, cable companies controlled the budget. They administered the community budget, but it was administered differently in Quebec and elsewhere. So in Quebec, there are 40 not-for-profit organizations that produce programming, but they do not have a license. So they give their content to cable distributors to broadcast. Outside of Quebec, it's different. So there is either a separate department in the cable company that is interconnected, and the smaller stations were closed. And other stations that are still left, like Rogers TV in Ottawa, for example, are incorporated with their own name. So if they want to continue with those few channels that remain, those would be specialized local licenses. But to develop a community voice, the community must be able to go through the administration and develop the programming. That is how their voice develops. It really wouldn't be possible when there's an administration that reports to stakeholders at the end of the day. Thank you very much. In your submission, you said that rules around the community aspect failed. You said that, or rather, how much do you receive at this time? Well, our Quebec counterpart appeared 2 weeks ago. We made a recommendation behind closed doors for the CRTC to provide funds in Quebec only, but it was not a specific recommendation. So what is received is 10% of what cable distributors have in total revenue. So it's a very small slice. Outside of Quebec, there is no request to contribute to non-profit community organizations, and that is the reason there are only 25 of them in the entire rest of the country. It's very difficult to reopen or to start up new companies once they're closed by cable distributors. Thank you. I'm sure you've read the directive that was published to the TRTC. It was published a few weeks ago. What is your take on this? And would you like to see any changes to it? Which section are you referencing specifically? I would just like your general take as it regards the cultural aspect, the community aspect. I haven't read that section, but I can make a submission to committee afterwards. Thank you very much. I've finished, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Champoux. For 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being with us. It's always a pleasure. It's very interesting. Mr. Payette, thank you for your opening statement. Here's the wordplay. What you said was music to my ears. I have a simple question, but I'm sure you could speak to it for hours on end. When it comes to the importance of this Bill C-10 for the future of Francophone music in Canada, well, thank you for this question. That is a big question. So when this bill is amended to foster our culture and when it is passed, it will be huge. So the music sector is a bit different from the audiovisual sector. Just about all the same songs are found on different platforms. And the more times the song is played, the more money is involved. The share of Francophone music took a drastic nosedive. According to recent data, of the most listened to songs in Canada, only almost 3% were Francophone songs. And a very small number of, and 50% of all songs listened to online were in French. The CRTC could give us better numbers, but other than the Quebec music industry, that percentage would be down to 14%. So we have lost 3 times our market share. The drop was huge. It was perhaps even 4 or 5% of our market share that dropped when it comes to Francophone music. There's an important issue of discoverability. In your opinion, how can discoverability be achieved? How can we show that our content is interesting and worthwhile? Well, our content certainly is worth discovering. People might think that people choose the music they want to hear, but perhaps they choose just one song they want to hear and then they listen to songs for hours after that. Because there is a recommendation algorithm on YouTube, for example. 64% of videos recommended by YouTube's algorithm already have over 1 million views, and only 5% have under 500,000 views based on a research center's research of Quebec artists. Unfortunately, there are not that many songs that have been listened to more than 500,000 times. So you can see that these algorithms are not adapted based on our markets. They're not interested in our market because our market is just too small for that. There's also a financial aspect tied to this, incentive to play one song more than another song. Other countries have a bigger repertoire, more negotiating power, and they have more power to showcase their own repertoire, whether it be in algorithm recommendations, so that their music is played before our music is online. So you say we should be able to have access to companies' algorithms so that we can include that in our regulations. Well, I don't fully agree with the way of doing things. I don't think we need necessarily to understand how algorithms work. That's extremely complex and it evolves. We need to know if our content is recommended. If it is recommended, then we're able to measure that and we can establish a target, like a minimum target for Canadian or Francophone content on online music services. If we don't have that, then market interests will not be favorable for our music, and we see in market shares that we are losing access to our public. And that is the main objective of the Broadcasting Act, is to make our music accessible to Quebecers and Canadians. Thank you. I see that Mr. Friedman raised his hand. Perhaps you could comment on this. I have about a minute left. Yes, just briefly, Mr. Champoux. Thank you very much. I would say that Quebec community stations and outside Quebec play a large role in original French language music. So support for our station is one way of discovering new musicians. Certainly. And while I have you, Mr. Friedman, could you speak to something else? I know that you're looking for recognition in the Broadcasting Act and in general. So I would say that your fight will be much, or rather, why should there be mention included? Well, there need to be people in the CRTC who understand the reality of community stations. The CRTC must also have expertise regarding our interests. It's not like public or private radio.
Friedman. Ms. McPherson, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our witnesses today. I've had some time to speak with them prior to this meeting, but it's very interesting to hear their perspectives, and I'm looking forward to asking some questions. And particularly, I'm going to start, I think, with the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations. As you know, I am located in Edmonton, Strathcona. We are a Francophone community, have a large Francophone population here. So, of course, minority languages and community broadcasting is very important to my constituents, to people in my community. And so when you talk about recognition with the Act and the importance of having that recognition be part of it, Ms. Edwards talked a little bit earlier on about how you'd like to see the community broadcasting be included in other areas of the Act throughout the Act. Can you talk a little bit about what those areas are, where you'd like to see more inclusion? Could you fill us in a little bit more on that, please?
Yeah, so the first recommendation to have a definition, we assume they're redefining what a BDU is to take in online platforms. So if we suggest a definition for community broadcasting that defines it as not-for-profit and including participation by community members in administration, day-to-day operations, and programming. So we provided the wording for that in the brief. So there is a definition section at the beginning of the Act. That's where we'd like that, because the word community element and community program is used twice in the Act, but it's never defined. And in fact, the private and public sectors aren't defined either, but I leave that to them if they want to ask for I think a clearer definition would help. So secondly, there needs to be, that doesn't tell everybody what community media does. We've had questions here today, what does it do? So our suggestion is that there was a section 3.1R, which used to refer to alternative programming services. And it's been dropped in the current draft, but it almost exactly described what the community sector actually does do. And so as low-hanging fruit, it could be just slightly adapted to do what we need. So for example, if I look at that, just 1 second. It's got already 4 elements that are needed. I'm just flipping to the end of our brief. That section 3.1R says it should be innovative and complementary to the programming provided for mass audiences. Well, that's what we do. That's what it said before. Number 2 used to say cater to taste and interest not adequately provided for by the programming provided for mass audiences and include programming devoted to culture, politics, and the arts. Well, that's what we do. Number 3, reflect Canada's communities, regions, and multicultural nature. Well, that's what we do. Number 4, be made available throughout Canada on all platforms. So that's what we do. We suggested adding to, because alternative media services didn't necessarily embody the idea of community participation. So we added a number 4, be produced by and for local communities through their not-for-profit participative structure. We included alternative media services didn't refer to our training role. So we added a number 5, support the development of Canadian creative content. And then the last one, someone else asked whether, why is it not okay for-profit community media to exist, or where's the conflict? Almost all the 30 to 40 years of audiovisual archives of our small communities that cable companies, collected over time, to their credit, back in the day they worked, they've all been put in dumpsters now. So many communities that have no audiovisual record of their council meetings, their festivals, it's all gone. So we added a number 7 too, that they should be made available for archival purposes to Library and Archives Canada. I think the loss of cable community TV archives is one of the single biggest cultural losses in Canadian history that nobody's talking about. So a slight modification to that. And then lastly, just describing a role doesn't always capture what we do. So we've suggested a few other places where existing wording could be clarified so that our role is clear. And I think the strongest ones you can see are in 310 and P. We've beefed up the language to make sure that there's programming within the system for Indigenous persons and disabled persons. And I think the realistic way to make that real is to recognize that in smaller communities and for smaller niche groups, we actually give them the resources and opportunity to develop their own content. They don't have to wait around for someone else to do it for them, and that's how they develop their voices. So we have some other examples, but those are, I think, really strong ones to give you an idea.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Edwards. Mr. Friedman, you spoke a little bit about adequate resources and making sure that community broadcasters have those adequate resources they need. Could you just talk a little bit about what you see as the future for community broadcasting if those adequate resources are not provided, if that is not done properly?
Well, I'll just reference what Commissioner Scott mentioned. And the reality is that tangible benefits are going down. CCD, in other words, Canadian Content Development dollars, are really what fund community radio. And as there are fewer transactions, there's fewer dollars. So the reality is if something isn't done soon, the small amount of funding that comes to us from the community commercial radio stations is going to disappear. And that means that community stations are going to be left even further on their own in terms of trying to make sure that they have the funding to do what they need to do. So what we're proposing and what we'd like to see happen is a fund setup that will supply a number of important things. Number one, operational, stable, long-term, predictable operational funding, very similar to what the CBC gets, in order to ensure that we're able to maintain our position and maintain what we're doing. So number one, we'd like to see that. We'd also like to see funding for research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to move on. Now, folks, we're going to go to the second round, but I really need you could really help me out here, given that we have an extra thing to do. You could really help me out if you could make your questions quite pointed. Mr. Manley, would you like to give a point of order?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping somebody can carve off 1 minute for me so I can ask a 10-second question and get a 50-second response.
Duly noted. We're now going to go to Mr. Aitchison for 5 minutes, please.
I will give Mr. Manley his 1 minute because I don't have a headset.
Oh, okay. So, Mr. Manley, you will start. And Mr. Aitchison, could you wave your hand when you're ready, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Aitchison. I'd like to ask Mr. Friedman and Ms. Edwards about the role that community media plays in democracy in this country. In small communities, what is the role for candidate profiles, for candidate debates, so that the community can understand who they might be voting for?
Well, it's a critical role. What we've seen is without the local voice, that we've seen the void filled by Facebook, conspiracy theories, and nobody knows where that information is coming from. And so what we provide is on the ground journalists and hosts and broadcasters who see their constituents and see the people they speak to in the grocery store at the end of their shift. They know what's going on, and they're the ones who can provide an opportunity for that. We've seen an increasing number of municipal councils using community radio station to have their council meetings online. Particularly during the pandemic, this gives access to citizens to be able to have a conversation and to hear what's happening in their local areas. And the support for town hall meetings is absolutely critical. I'll let Ms. Edwards continue.
Yeah, I was just going to repeat the same things. The other thing, there's two other unique things about community media. We don't have the soundbite limitations on time that commercial and private or public media have. So we feel that we can give our MPs unlimited airtime. They don't get their messages filtered. And secondly, part of participating in a democracy is for ordinary people to learn to develop their voices. Just because you stick up a YouTube video doesn't mean you know how to express yourself properly, or that you can express a minority point of view, that you're not going to be attacked. So having community media centers that help people develop those voices so that they can play a role in public discourse is critical. And also providing airtime for online public discourse so that the whole communities know that conversations are going on. And if you look at the work we've done under the local journalism initiative at commediaportal.ca, you'll see a lot of those conversations. And during the pandemic, we've had a lot of, for example, online Zoom conversations, people asking, doctors questions about the vaccines, and debating everything else going on in their communities. So we can do long form debate and support public discourse in a way the other sectors can't. And thanks so much for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few minutes left. I mistakenly pointed at Mr. Aitchison. I think Mr. Waugh wanted in. There was a mistake, or sorry. You wanted to make a change, is that correct?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Wall. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, the Professional Music Publishers Association, you're right on about YouTube. It is not regulated in C10, and everybody is using YouTube, and we're going to have an issue because you've pointed out correctly that this should be regulated, and it's not. So is that an amendment or something that you would like to bring forward later? Because as you all know, even as MPs, we use YouTube, and being not regulated is an issue with C10.
Yes, well, our proposal is clear. For 2.1 and 4.1 of Bill C10, we want to protect our culture. We feel like the priority is on protecting social media. So there's a lack of vision in C10 on social media. It's based on an online practice to distinguish content, but it's not important how it's uploaded. The content is what's important. The content passes through a distributor, then it ends up on YouTube, and it comes from a record company or an artist. And as soon as it goes on YouTube, the platform is not regulated and it's not responsible. The bill should allow publishers to put their product directly on Spotify and these platforms. Companies should not be allowed to escape Bill C10. Social media are fundamental for the future of our music. YouTube's #1 right now. There's also TikTok and many other places where people discover music. Music will be shared on these platforms for decades to come. And I've also had conversations with public servants where technical arguments were given. Thank you. So the technical arguments don't hold water. Thank you.
Ms. Ian, for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. Mr. Payette, just want to follow up a little more on YouTube and want to know specifically how, when people listen to YouTube and other platforms, it directly impacts your members.
Our members represent musical works, so the songs that we hear on YouTube, so they are directly impacted by that. This is a major issue. We don't understand why YouTube, etc., would not be regulated under the Broadcasting Act, even though Spotify would be, for the simple argument of the technological process. It's completely beyond our comprehension, which is why we submitted proposals regarding 2.1 and 4.1. I'd like to continue, if I may, on what I was saying about the technical argument. We were told that it's too difficult to distinguish between amateur and professional content, but that is completely false. The industry is using metadata and has been using them for decades, and YouTube is already distinguishing between among its music, and it is the #1 service, and it is fundamental for the future of our sector. It should also be subjected to Bill C-10.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Payette. If I might go back to Ms. Edwards, and feel free, Mr. Friedman, to answer this absolutely as well. Bottom line here, if BC10 moves forward, no changes at all, what will this mean for the future of community broadcasting? What will we be missing on the Canadian broadcasting landscape?
Well, for 10 years, I mean, I'll let Alex answer for radio, but for 10 years, we've been underscoring to the CRTC and faithfully participating in CRTC hearings about community television, specifically saying, look, the digital transition has happened. Cable companies are consolidated. They're shutting those studios. They're not covering council meetings. All that programming's gone in dumpsters. And we've been getting nowhere. As Mr. Scott admitted in 2016, they decided that local news was more important. I mean, we can do local news too, but we can do it in much smaller communities, all the communities where it's not profitable. And so what we're afraid of is that there's no further specificity about our role. All these reports keep coming out that don't understand our role, that will continue. These policies will be made that just leave us out because nobody gets our role. We think that MPs more than anyone else get our role, because if you live in a community where there's no public and private broadcaster, you have no way to contact your constituents. So really, we're in your hands. Other people, frankly, have told us for 10 years, the CRTC is in a situation of regulatory capture. The solution to your problem is political. You need to talk to MPs. So we're here begging you because, as I said, there's 25 struggling little community TV organizations outside Quebec now. Quebec's in a special situation with 40 in the province because the province supports them, and the CRTC behind closed doors, has encouraged the Quebec cable companies to support them. But there's nothing outside Quebec. And we just think we're going to get more of the same. We've put data that is incontrovertible in front of them, that the cable community system does not work. And we're not saying close the remaining stations. We're just saying recognize that the not-for-profit sector is there, that we can go to small communities where cable companies can't and don't want to be anymore. And if we're going to a service contract system with the CRTC anyways, and they want to keep running their stations, I mean, recognize them for what they are. They're corporately branded, private specialty local channels. And, if they have a value and there's programming, then they'll keep doing them. But we need to have the community empowered to step into the gap in all the places where there isn't cable community TV. Over to you, Alex.
And the reality is, if we aren't enshrined in this act, if we don't have the protections to keep doing what we're doing, communities will be deprived of multilingual programming. Immigrant communities will not be able to see themselves reflected in the broadcasts. We're going to have a real lack of community connection, and that is critical to our democracy. So without belaboring the point, the reality is that we play a critical role in the discourse and the promotion of Canadian material in this country, Canadian stories, Canadian music, Canadian information. And if we're not protected, if we're not enshrined in this, we'll continue to be overlooked as funding is handed out, and Canadians won't get that service.
Thank you, Ms. Ian. Now we go to Mr. Champ.
Mr. Champoux, for 2 minutes, 30 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll come back to Mr. Payette. And I'll come back to a sentence you said. You said, content is what must be regulated, not the way it is distributed. And that's interesting when it comes to social media. You also talked about the case of TikTok, which is an extremely prominent way that youth today discover music. and it is here to stay. Its influence will continue for years to come. I'd like to hear from you about how we can ensure discoverability on these platforms. Given that a YouTuber, an individual, cannot be regulated. Even if I have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, I can't be regulated. So how can that be regulated? Well, YouTube really is the major service because it's the most popular. It clearly distributes professional clips, professional music videos, and those are the ones that have the most appeal and the most watches. But that's professional content. So we need the CRTC to do its job and obtain data on what's happening. If we do not have clear jurisdiction over social media services, it will be impossible for the CRTC to gather data. The CRTC will be completely in the dark. However, if social media is covered by the bill, the CRTC will be able to decide whether or not an exemption is appropriate. But at least figures and numbers are necessary to be able to clearly understand the situation. And to answer your question about TikTok, if, 50% of TikTok's revenue is from music, perhaps a contribution should be made to Music Action or to a Canadian Music Fund based on that 50% of their revenue. Many things should be considered by the CRTC that have not been. So this is money that we could gain in compensation and contribution by these companies, and this could help discoverability for Francophone content. Well, visibility is important because, of course, what we want is for people to listen to our music, and that has repercussions beyond the internet because people go to concerts and they buy merchandise, etc. So there are so many repercussions from contact.
First, and for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have the the privilege of being the last 2.5 minutes of the C10 study, which is exciting. I am going to go to Mr. Payette for the final 2.5 minutes. Mr. Payette, you spoke earlier and it triggered something for me, but you talked a lot about user-generated content, of course, and why it's important that is defined so much stronger. You said that you felt that the testimony that was brought forward by Mr. Ripley to this committee was misleading. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about that, knowing that this is the last testimony we will hear on C10. If you could make sure that we understand clearly about the user-generated content.
What I really wanted to specify was that services like YouTube already distinguish between professional and amateur content, so it is not a difficulty for them when it comes to music. So when it comes to rights holders that I represent, there is a content and a royalties managing system that is very sophisticated. So it's not true, this argument that it's difficult to distinguish between professional and amateur music. So that is what I found that Mr. Ripley was not precise on. It could be because he lacks understanding on the technical aspect of these platforms. In any case, I don't think that we should limit ourselves in an act to technical processes. I think that there should be objectives. It should be broad. The CRTC must be given the ability to implement this act, and depending on how technology will evolve. The CRTC must be able to adapt so that our culture can continue to reach Canadians.
If that is not done, if we don't see that content regulated adequately, would you be able to support C10 as it currently stands, or would you not be able to support it in its current iteration?
Well, the current situation is not acceptable. Bill C10, as it is not acceptable either. There needs to be a political will to amend it So we really need for you to amend it. It's important for the Broadcasting Act to be seen as a cultural piece of legislation. Business models, as I said, will evolve. Technology will evolve. Canadians will consume content, but will it be our content? That is the question. Thank you.
Again, Mr. Payette, don't take it personally. It's just the clock. You're up against the clock there. Thank you to all of our guests for coming in today. I want to thank Ms. Edward, Catherine Edwards from Cactus, Alex Friedman from Community Radio Fund, and from UPEM. I hope UPEM, yeah, UPEM. Very good. Jérôme Payette. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So we have, sorry, Ms. McPherson, do you have a point of order?
No, I just wanted to bring up some committee business once our guests have left.
Okay, well, we ought to do that now as they exit. We're in public, so is it regarding the motions?
It is, Mr. Chair.
And you want to debate your motion, is that correct?
That is correct, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and perhaps overstep my boundaries a little bit. But given the motions, and they're quite substantial, we have two motions that are very similar, with one modification, one change. So here's what I propose. Of these two motions, the one key difference, as I've just went through them again, at the end, Ms. McPherson's motion requires, sorry, I'm going to read this directly. Right. That the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 180 calendar days from the adoption of this motion. So of the other material, they are quite similar.
Just the number of meetings, Mr. Chair.
Ms. McPherson, I'll just one moment. The number of meetings is the same. It's 3, from what I can glean from this. Okay.
If I
Ms. McPherson, go ahead.
Sorry. Only that I think one of them says up to and one of them says at least. I think that there is some difference in that.
Yes, okay. Apologies. Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. You are correct. I was thinking 3. It is up to 3.
I couldn't even remember what adjournment meant, so I think we can.
Okay. Is it possible to collectively come together on this to come up with a motion? In other words, of the two things that are change here now, up to 3, and the 180 days reporting back, may I suggest to Mr. Dong that we suspend for a bit? Would you like to have a discussion about that, Mr. Dong? I'm just only going to recognize you now on this particular issue. Mr. Dong.
Chair,
Okay, one second. Mr. Dong, I'm going to let you finish your thought, and then I have to go to Mr. Reyes.
Okay. Given that I believe the...
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to have a clarification from the clerk.
You want a clarification from the clerk himself?
Du greffier ou de vous?
From the clerk or from you, whoever could answer me. My point of order is to know.
That first, Mr. Dong, I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My point of order is the meeting was meant to finish at 3. The meeting is being delayed. I believe that takes consent. I don't know if it's unanimous consent, but the committee must consent for us to continue since we've already gone over time. I'd like to clarify that situation, please, because it's Friday.
And then, Mr. Reyes, sorry to cut you off, but usually when the times are set, it's taken as a consent that we leave at that time, but it's not written in stone per se, unless you move a motion to adjourn. Otherwise, we would just keep going. That's normally what we've done. It's more of a convention than anything else. The meeting is done until it is officially adjourned. We use the times as a Yes, right. It's a guideline. It's a placeholder more than anything else. So unless you want to move a motion to adjourn, we're going to keep this going as we talked about earlier. Mr. Dong, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Given the fact that my motion was the first one to move today, and I believe the notice was given prior to Mr. McPherson's motion notice. I believe that I have my motion should receive the first chance for debate and for the members to consider. Having said that, I recognize that there's great similarity in the two motions, and I'd be happy to accept friendly amendments that would, satisfy Ms. McPherson's intent in her motion. And I also want to point out that my motion, although it didn't specifically say a certain amount of dates before responding, but the Standing Order 109 does require the government to respond within 120 days, which is shorter. Thank you.
Right. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, I have to go with the list I have here. So Mr. Dom, Mr. Reyes.
Monsieur le Président.
Yeah, Mr. Reyes, go ahead.
Oui, donc.
Point of order. I would like another clarification, please. I might seem very persistent today, but these are things we all learn in committees. So when we received the motion by email from the clerk, the email was under the name of Mr. Housefather, but today we saw that it was not Mr. Housefather who tabled that motion. So I was wondering if that is even permissible in the rules, or if we should move right on to Ms. McPherson's motion.
Fine. Mr. Dong is replacing Mr. Housefather today, and he's able to move and debate the motion. Okay, let's go next on the list, Mr. Brusen. Sorry, Mr. Brusen, we can barely hear you. There we go.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure that my motion is in queue, and just to point out that if we have unanimous consent for everyone to add that extra time, then we don't actually have to debate it and we can just move on.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Ms. McPherson.
Sorry, I lowered my hand and didn't turn on my mic. The only thing I would just say is that in terms of Mr. Dong's comments is that he interjected himself in this committee before the committee meeting was started. And I know that you have already said that you didn't notice that, and I'm sure we could go back and take a look, but I think everybody in this room does know that. And also I would just put forward that there does not need to be any friendly amendments to mine in my motion that I put forward. So we could just accept it. And I think we do have the support of this committee to do so. So that would be all I would put forward for my intervention at this time.
I realize that, Ms. McPherson, but just to put yourself in my position for a moment, let's assume that he did raise his hand before we started. It didn't disqualify him from not raising the hand from the beginning of what I've seen. So then it becomes the chair's discretion as to who I recognize first. So rather than randomly pick someone, what I've done in the past on another committee is I would go to the speaking order of who's asking questions. If I see all four parties with their hands up, I would probably most likely pick the Conservatives first, then Liberal, then Bloc, and then NDP. We're living in a virtual world where hands go up and down, and electronically, I'm trying to surf my way through this. So please, I ask for your patience on that. So, Mr. Dong, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I don't mean no disrespect to the permanent members of this committee. This is a very personal issue for me. And I think as parliamentarians, we have a rare opportunity to collect into our official record the thoughts and recommendations from Asian community in Canada.
Okay.
And to show, I just want to respectfully ask if Chair, you could consult with the clerk and see, if my motion can be debated now, and I don't want this because I know the support for the study is there.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be a long back and forth.
Mr. Dong, I'm not diminishing the gravity of the subject matter. However, I do not want to commence into a debate right now before we decide what it is we're debating. Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes, go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding this situation, we all have two motions that seem to be similar, although there are a few small, significant differences. On our committee, in our party, perhaps we could use Ms. McPherson's motion. If Ms. McPherson wants to discuss I forget the MP's name, I'm sorry, the Liberal MP who tabled the other motion, I think they can sit down and maybe Monday make us another proposal quickly when we arrive, if two of them can agree amongst themselves. With that said, if not, I would ask for us to decide one after the other which we will choose.
Monsieur Champoux.
Mr. Champoux? Yes, Mr. Chair. I wanted to propose an amendment to Ms. McPherson's motion to...
We haven't decided which motion is on the floor yet before you go with amendments. I'm sorry, but first things have to come first. I see. Okay, folks. I'll go with Ms. McPherson, and then I'll go with Mr. Shields. I'm going to have to ask you to please keep this as brief as you can. Ms. McPherson.
Just one thing I didn't hear a comment on, Mr. Chair, from you, is that my original comment that the motion that I have put forward actually has all of the pieces that we would not need to amend it to have it combine or to have both the things that are included, I think, in the other motion. So I just wanted to flag that, and I'll pass that to Mr.
Sorry, Mr. Shields. You're on mute, sir. Did you want to speak, Mr. Shields? There you go.
I would move Ms. McPherson's motion.
All right. Mr. Shields has proposed a motion that we do the Ms. McPherson's. I'll get the right wording. 1 second. Right. So the motion on the floor is that we resume consideration of Ms. McPherson's motion.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Dong.
I don't know why this comes to this. I don't see a significant difference between the two bills, and so I would not agree with the previous comment made that there are important, significant difference in the motion, and in the fact that I move it first, and I think by precedence in the committees I've been in, whichever member who, in this case, I something for MP Housefather, so I do have the right to move a motion, and I believe I moved my motion first. Therefore, my motion should be debated and considered by the member first. And I just feel that if this, I've been for some reason I've been swept aside on the order of motion being considered. So, and I just want a explanation on that,
Mr.
Maybe through to the clerk.
Mr. Dong, I can get the clerk to weigh in as well, but essentially it works like this. There is no bearing as to what the rules state that you have to do that. The way I see this, and I'll ask the clerk to weigh in as well, what we've done is that we've suspended, by way of unanimous consent, to move this debate of the motion towards the end of the meeting. The order in which it comes in, there is no set in stone as to what that should be. I take your point that you could interpret it that way. But quite frankly, now I opened it up so that we could come together on two motions that are extremely similar. So I thought maybe we could work something out that. It appears we cannot. So what I have right now is that I have a motion from Mr. Shields to deal with Ms. McPherson's motion first, and we'll eventually go to a vote. Mr. Clerk, would you like to weigh in before I go to Mr. Reyes? Or sorry, Mr. Shields, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In an event where it isn't clear which motion the committee is going to retake or resume consideration of, if consensus isn't achieved, then it's incumbent upon a member to use the more formal mechanism of moving to resume consideration of the motion, which is what Mr. Shields has done. It constitutes a dilatory motion, which is non-amendable and non-debatable, and procedurally, the question should be put forthwith. Thank you.
Monsieur, I'm going to go to the electronic list again. Mr.
Champoux. Mr. Chair, I think we may have somewhat forgotten discussions. With all due respect for procedures and rules, and particularly with all due respect to Ms. McPherson, we have two motions that are very similar. They do have small details that are different. I think that for Mr. Dong, this motion has a personal importance, so I think we should right away vote on Ms. McPherson's motion. Or rather, I think it deserves discussion whether or not we're going to vote on Ms. McPherson's motion. I think these are two very similar motions. The results of both would be very similar.
There is no doubt about that. But before, I just find that instead of sliding into an actual debate on the motion's content itself, I have to step back. We have to step back from that to decide which motion comes first. As I mentioned, I think the clerk just pointed out what is currently on the floor from Mr. Shields to vote on Ms. McPherson's motion going first. So seeing nothing else, we're going to go to that vote right now. So again, just as a reminder, we now have a motion to debate Ms. McPherson's motion first. Monsieur Reyes.
Mr. Reyes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what I wanted to make sure of, that after Mr. Shields moved, that we would then see if we were going to dispense with Ms. McPherson's motion first and then Mr. Dong's. And then we could debate Ms. McPherson's motion, either to propose amendments or do something else. We would then have that possibility before voting to pass the motion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct, yes. All right. So, yeah, we're going to call for the vote. Mr. Dong? Mr. Dong, did I see your hand up?
I understand that what motion is on the floor right now, and we can go to vote. And I just, for all the reasons I listed earlier, I won't be able to support it because I feel that, well, I did I know what the motion is non-debatable, so I'm not going to debate.
Right. So
I'm just saying that
I've prolonged it enough already, Mr. Dong. I have to go to this vote right now. All right. Amy is going to do a recording of the vote. Amy, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. So for the vote on the question of Mr. Shields of whether to proceed to the person's motion, Madame Bessette?
No.
Ms. DeBruson?
No.
Mr. Dong?
No.
Ms. Ian?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
Vote against the motion.
Mr. Aitchison?
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes?
Oui.
Mr. Shields? Mr. Shields? Oh, sorry. Thank you. I'm going to take that as a yes with a thumbs up. Mr. Watt?
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux?
Je vais voter contre.
Ms. McPherson?
Yes.
Sorry, that was a little distorted. Was that a yes?
It was. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. So that's 6 nays and 5 yeas. Mr. Chair.
Okay, the motion is defeated, and we're now going to go to Mr. Dong.
Thank you, Chair. First of all,
Well, Mr. Dong, could you hang on 1 second? I think.
Really up to the committee. Whoever you want to recognize.
Yeah.
If you want.
So now we have two motions, notwithstanding Ms. McPherson's motion that we want to deal with. Mr. Dong, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't want to waste too much time for the members. I canvassed, I think, the majority of the members on the committee yesterday after the notice being put forward, and I understand that there is a broad support for this motion. It is the attacks we've witnessed in recent days. It's not. I think it's a symptom of a prolonged and profound challenge in our society. And there's a lot of recommendations, roundtables, and discussion taking place over the years. I've spoken to many advocates. I think as parliamentarians in Ottawa, as member of this highest institution in the country, having official.
Okay, so my apologies at the beginning, Mr. Dong. Were you finished? Because I meant to go to you. I thought you had a point of order. You did not. I didn't officially start the debate, but it seems like you have.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine. If you've started the debate, that's fine too. I don't think anybody would reject from that. So I have Mr. Shields.
Mic's on. Initially, Mr. Chair, and I appreciated your direction that you asked the two proposals of those amendments, or the two motions to get together to see if they could resolve them. There is no motion on the table. I'm close to saying, we need to quit. And if those two can't get together, that's the direction you gave them. We have no motion on the table. We've been way over time. I'm asking you, Mr. Chair, take some direction as you initially said, and let's see if we can get this done.
Okay, Ms. McPherson.
Sorry, I also agree that can you hear me?
I apologize. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ms. DeBruzen. Or sorry, Ms. McPherson. Sorry. It's just the side here is confusing me. Go ahead.
No, I also think that it's very important. I know that the NDP has been doing an awful lot of work on this, and I know that my colleague Jenny Kwan has done an awful lot of work on this, and that this is very, very important to our party. It's more important to me to get this motion passed, and while I strongly believe my motion is much stronger, for a number of reasons, I'm happy to amend the motion that we are debating to ensure that it is at least 3 meetings and that there is the 180 calendar day minimum added.
So to be clear, you are moving an amendment?
Yes.
And essentially,
Sure.
it takes the 1 second, Mr. Dong. It takes the sentence in your motion where it talks about 180 days, and you want to insert it into the motion that we're currently debating, which was moved by Mr. Dong.
And Mr. Housefather,
Correct, but
at least 3 meetings, please. It's very important that we have adequate time for this.
Chair,
Needs a clarification. 1 second. Mr. Dong, I'm going to get this clarification first on this amendment before we go to Ms. DeBruzen, and then, it appears Ms. DeBruzen does not want. Okay. So, Clerk?
Thank you very much. Just for the benefit of Amy and myself, to ensure that we understand the amendment being moved, my understanding is that the motion moved by Mr. Dong will be amended by replacing the words "of no more than" with "at least," which is to say, rather than "of no more than 3 meetings," it will now read "at least 3 meetings," and then to add the following into the motion: that the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 180 calendar days from the adoption of this motion. Do I have that text correct? Thank you.
Mr. Dong. Oh,
Thank you,
sorry.
Chair. So-
my apologies. Just so that we're clear.
I nodded.
Okay, I was just referring to the clerk. Okay, Mr. Dong.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I wonder, first of all, if it would be helpful to committee members if I read out the motion as amended again, and then I'm okay with the amendment. I just have one question to Ms. McPherson. The Standing Order 109 requires the government to respond in 120 days, which is shorter than 180 days. Wouldn't that be better to hear back from the government with a comprehensive response in a shorter time frame? Just a question to Ms. McPherson.
Ms. McPherson, do you want to respond?
I'm sorry, in the motion that I'm looking at, it does not say that. So the one that was sent to the committee does not say that. So I absolutely would be happy with 120 days.
Yeah, because it says pursuant to
Mr. Dong, Mr. Dong, go ahead.
Sorry, Chair. I apologize.
I just don't want a free for all conversation, folks, because people at Hansard has to record this. It's hard enough to do their jobs. It's Friday afternoon, so I need to recognize you first. Mr. Dong.
Obviously, I'm too excited about this motion in a good way. The Standing Order 109, I believe, by definition, we can double check with the clerk, requires the government to respond within 120 days. So if that's indeed the case, and Ms. McPherson is agreeable to 120 days, then I think that part of the amendment doesn't have to. Perhaps it's just leave the motion as is for that part.
Okay, Mr. Dong, there is a difference, and I'm going to allow the clerk to explain it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dong is absolutely right that Standing Order 109 does allow 120 calendar days for the government to present a comprehensive response to a committee report. What Ms. McPherson, however, has made an amendment to add into the motion is that the committee present its findings and recommendations to the House no later than 180 calendar days from the adoption of the motion. That is to say that the committee is imposing upon itself a deadline of 180 calendar days to present its report. Once the committee's report is presented to the House, then Standing Order 109 will begin, and the 120 calendar days will begin to take effect.
And just an update, we're still debating the amendment. Mr. Dong, did you want to respond?
Absolutely. Thanks for the clarification, and I would support that amendment then.
Okay, so we're going to go. I'm going to go to a recorded vote. Oh, sorry, Mr. Reyes. Before we do that, Mr. Reyes.
Monsieur le Président, je l'ai demandé pas.
Okay.
No more debate.
No more debate. So let's seeing no more debate. Sorry, I'm not declaring no more debate. Seeing no more debate, I'm going to ask for a record. We're going to do a recorded vote on the amendment. On the amendment that was put forward by Ms. McPherson. Amy.
Thank you, sir. Just by nodding, does anybody want me to read the amendment again, or?
Yes.
No?
Oh.
Okay, understood. Okay, so on the amendment of Ms. McPherson to Mr. Dong's motion, Madame Bessette?
Oui.
Ms. DeBruson?
Yes.
Mr. Dong?
Yes.
Ms. Ian?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
I vote for the motion.
For the amendment?
I vote for the amendment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Aitchison?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Reyes?
Oui.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Waugh?
Yes.
Mr. Champ?
En faveur.
Ms. McPherson?
Yes.
That's 12 yeas, sir.
Therefore, the amendment has been accepted. We now go to the main motion as amended. We have Mr. Reyes first.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je demanderai le vote.
Could Mr. Reyes please put on his headset?
Mr. Reyes, you're going to have to put on your headset. We're having some difficulties with the translation. Interpretation, sorry. Go ahead.
Désolé.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'd ask for us to proceed to a vote. I think we've already debated enough. I think there is a certain consent among most of us. Mr. Dong explained his side. Ms. McPherson explained hers. We might all have preferences for one motion or the other, but in essence, we all do agree. And then I will raise my hand for another motion.
Seeing no more debate, we're going to go to a vote. Amy?
Thank you, sir. So the vote on Mr. Dong's motion for anti-Asian racism. Madame Bessette?
Oui.
Ms. de Brussen?
Yes.
Mr. Dong?
Yes.
Ms. Ian?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Vote for the motion.
Mr. Aitchison?
Yes.
Monsieur Reyes?
Oui.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Waugh?
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux?
En faveur, oui.
Ms. McPherson?
Yes.
It's 12 yeas. 11 yeas.
Okay, motion accepted. Now we're going to go to Ms. de Brusen.
In the interest of not taking time away from witnesses, I had moved at the beginning of the motion that we add time during clause by clause so that we can get through the Bill C-10 expeditiously. And I would like us to have the rest of that discussion, which we had suspended out of kindness to our witnesses and respect to our witnesses.
Okay, so that's opening the debate on this motion that you mentioned from the beginning of the meeting. Mr. Reyes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is now 3:36. I had a meeting on my agenda for 3:15. I put it off to 3:30. I would like to move for a unanimous vote for us to...
Yes. Are you asking, okay, you're asking for the meeting to be adjourned? Seeing none of it. Now that's, we have to go to the vote. We have to put that to a vote. Okay, Amy? Ms. de Brusen?
I just want to be
I'm
clear
sorry.
that we could,
Sorry.
this could be a unanimous consent
Ms.
to my motion.
Ms. de Brusen, I realize that, but we have to, he moved a motion to adjourn. Amy?
So the motion is that we do adjourn the meeting. Madame Bessette? No, I'm going to take the thumbs down as a no. Ms. de Brussen?
No.
Mr. Dong?
No.
Ms. Ian?
No.
Mr. Lewis?
I vote against the motion.
Mr. Aitchison?
I vote in favor.
Monsieur Reyes?
En faveur de la motion.
Mr. Shields?
Yes.
Mr. Waugh?
Yes.
Monsieur Champoux?
Oui.
Ms. McPherson?
No.
Six nays, 5 yeas.
Okay, Ms. de Brusen, continuing on.
I don't think that we need to spend too much time discussing this. It's just a matter of the this bill being very important, that witnesses have stated that it's urgent that we deal with this, and that during clause by clause, I am proposing that we add the additional time during clause by clause so that we can deal with it expeditiously. I think that we can agree that it's in the best interests of our stakeholders that we have the time to talk about the amendments, but to move it quickly. And I am asking the committee to commit the time necessary to be able to have that discussion and to return it to the House expeditiously.
Ms. McPherson.
And I don't want to continue to keep this meeting going. I'm concerned about this, but my concern is that in the what I had discussed previously with Mr. Bruson and what is on the motion is not very clear what time means. So we have concerns about whether or not we're able to add to Monday meetings, and if they're on Friday meetings, what does hours mean? My understanding was that it was a limited amount of hours. It's very important to all members of this committee that we get this bill passed, but there is also other obligations that we have as parliamentarians. I think it's important that we clarify what that time commitment looks like before we agree or disagree with this motion.
I saw Mr. Shields. No. Okay. Back to Ms. DeBruzen.
So that would be at the discretion of the chair, and part of the reason, and I will say that in my past experience at committee, we have extended hours, sometimes many hours into evenings to be able to deal with legislation expeditiously. So this is not some outlying type of thing. And usually, in fact, it doesn't require much debate. It just is agreed upon. I have sought the consent from all of the parties multiple times to add extra hours on our Friday meetings so that we could get through this more quickly. I've been unable to get that. And so now I've put it as a formal motion. And the question is, in a virtual world, I can't pinpoint when those hours are placed because we have other challenges that we must work around. But I would think that as parliamentarians, it's incumbent upon all of us to do the work that we need to do to serve our stakeholders and to get this done. And like I said, it would be within the discretion of the chair to make sure that it's done appropriately. But I do not understand an argument against putting in the time we need to do as parliamentarians to get this work done.
Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. First one is technical. I'd like to know if the vote on this motion must be unanimous for it to take effect, for us to change hours. Actually, that's my only question to begin, and I'll come back after.
To be unanimous, no. Mr. Waugh.
Friday, as we all know, when we sit in Ottawa, and many of us have 5 and 6 hour flights on Friday after sitting in the House of Commons. So that's an issue that I personally would have, and I can see we have MP McPherson from Edmonton, and we got a heavy schedule coming up when we do return to the House on the 12th. And so that would be my issue with extending hours on Friday.
Ms. McPherson.
I would just like to check with the clerk as well in terms of, one of the things Mr. Bruson brings up is the idea that this is the normal way that this has gone in other committees. Unfortunately, we're not in a normal world, and we are very dependent on the ability of our House of Commons resources. And so I do worry about the ability to access translation, the ability to access space, the ability, can the clerk talk about what are the resources that are available through the House of Commons? I don't want to put any staff in any situation where they're not being cared for because we didn't make enough time for this work.
Yeah, I understand the ramifications of this if it's successful. If this motion passed about the resources, we would get to that. I would personally address that if it was passed. But in the meantime, I will ask the clerk to respond briefly over some of your concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the current situation, the schedule of committee meetings has been approved by the whips of all recognized parties. I would suspect if a committee, or we have been told, is that if a committee wishes to derivate from that schedule, the request would be put into the whips for approval. I would assume that the same would apply even if this motion was adopted, that request would have to be made by the chair to the whips of the recognized parties for their consideration to ensure that the sufficient resources exist. Thank you.
Mr. Reyes. You're on.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. DeBruzen clearly indicated that this is a very important bill. I don't think anyone would disagree with that here. But we have many important bills, many tasks that are part of our duties that we must complete. The committee has been extremely flexible by agreeing to start the study as a pre-study, even though, as it was claimed, that the Conservatives held things up in the House, but nothing was held up because we already started the pre-study at committee. It was the Liberals who put an end to the House by proroguing. I don't think that it's 1 or 2 weeks that will change anything at this stage in the game. Sincerely, I think that that would be asking too much of our resources at Parliament. So I agree to extend meetings, but not regularly each week. Mr. Chair, I would like for us to vote because it is at 3:45 and we've already debated at length.
Duly noted, but I see hands up, Monsieur Champoux.
I will add my 2 cents worth to the debate, and I agree. I think that we have been very diligent in dealing with this bill. I think we've been flexible, and there have been delays. We have sometimes delayed, and then we have moved on to reinvite witnesses at another committee meeting. I think we've all done our part. I have already showed my interest to adding time at our committee. Many of us have to travel. Many of us have duties in our ridings. But my constituents require me to be in the riding, and that's a reason why I think that we can add another meeting, but not extending time on Friday or Monday.
Ms. DeBruzen.
I'm happy for us to go to a vote. My point has been, and it is all along, we are MPs who have committed to do this work. I hadn't set out a specific time that the extra hours would be put in. That is at the discretion of the chair and all of the work that has to happen at the back end to make sure it's fair on staff. But once again, we have a job to do. We've committed to this job. That's why we're here. And I can see no reason why a committee would actually oppose putting in the work it needs to do to get it done. But if that's how people want to vote, that's up to them. They can be put on record as not wanting to do the extra work to move this along expeditiously.
Madame Bessette.
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a small comment. For the last few meetings, we're always going over time, close to 4 hours, and adding 1 hour to the meeting would make it from 12:30 to 3:30. So ending at 3:30 would be probably 30 minutes before our projected end time for today. So I'm just trying to understand why we can't have that extra hour. Thank you. Mr. Champoux? Well, first, I just want to make sure that I have understood Ms. DeBruzen. She's talking about our opinions that should be recorded in the minutes of our meeting. I hope I did not understand her intention, and that's all I will say, Mr. Chair. Mr. Reyes? Mr. Chair, I agree with Mr. Champoux. I'm offended by what Ms. DeBruzen said. She's saying that by voting against her motion, we would be obstructing the bill, the project. I've seen the Liberals do this all the time, saying that the Conservatives are actually the ones filibustering, but despite the fact that all members of this committee have been very flexible, we've made sure that we could do more studies, more pre-studies, so that we do not hinder debate. And of course, it goes to our privileges, and I think that Ms. de Bruzen is walking a very, very fine line, saying that it's being recorded and then we'll know who wants to work on C10. Saying such things is almost a threat. It's very close, and I'm really offended, sincerely offended, and I hope that I've misinterpreted what she said. Ms. McPherson.
I just wanted to clarify on something that Ms. Bissett said. So we still don't have clarity within this motion. This motion does not provide clarity of the amount of time that we are talking about. So I would just like to clarify. She said an hour. That is what I had been told before. That is not within this motion. Are we talking about 1 hour? Because I think that there is. I understand what you said, Mr. Clerk, that this is up for you to decide. But I think that it is very material to whether or not we can support a motion. Is what that time constraint looks like.
Okay, I have Mr. Reyes. Did you want to? Your hand is up.
Oui, Monsieur.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I ask for the vote.
Hands up. Seeing into that debate, we're going to go to a vote. Normally, I would ask for dissension, but I'm assuming there is. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. So just to be clear, the vote is on Ms. de Bruzen's motion to extend the hours for the consideration of Bill C10. Probably don't need to reread that motion. So if everyone's in agreement, so the vote on the motion to extend the sitting times for C10. Madame Bissett. Oui, I'll take that thumb up as a yes. Ms. de Bruzen.
Yes.
Mr. Dong.
Oui.
Ms. Ian.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis.
I vote for the motion.
Mr. Aitchison.
No.
Mr. Reyes.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Monsieur Champoux.
No.
Ms. McPherson.
Yes.
So that's 6 yeas, 5 nays. Mr. Chair.
Okay, so motion accepted, adopted rather. And what we're going to do, one of the things I would suggest is, since we've gone way over time, I won't get into it too much, but it just suffice to say that one of the obvious choices would be to extend the Friday from 2 hours to 3 hours, as was pointed out earlier by Madame Bissett. I would agree with her. That's one of the options I think that we should say we can say yes to immediately. The other options that we are before us, whether they are other days or extension of Monday, which I understand will be difficult, we'll have to report back. The direction I need from the committee on this issue is this. Do we do this offline, as the expression is, or do we want to do this in a subcommittee setting? Subcommittee setting. Do you want to handle this outside of the confines of an actual subcommittee meeting? Am I clear on that? Okay. All right. So we'll pick that. I'll pick that up with members and the clerk. With Amy, we'll discuss what we're looking for. But I will say at the beginning, we can extend Friday from 2 hours to 3 hours. That I'm pretty sure we can do. Granted, the whips are okay with it as well. Okay. That being said, I just have one final item to bring up. As you know, as of Monday, we're looking at the Facebook issue. We're having witnesses in to talk about Facebook. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Mr. Reyes, who will be taking over as chair. I will be in Newfoundland under quarantine rules where my internet signal is not strong at all. So I think it would be best for the committee and running of the committee for Mr. Reyes to take over, and I thank him again. One thing, however, that they may bring up during that meeting is that they've provided a background document, Facebook has, a background document to the committee to disperse to members of the committee. However, you will not have it at that meeting because we have to send it to Translation Bureau to be checked. just for the record, they did send it in bilingual. They sent it in both languages. But as you know, because of the motion we adopted with Monsieur Champoux, then we have to send it to translation to be vetted. But that won't be completed until Tuesday, the day after. I'm looking for Amy to nod to make sure that I'm correct in that. I am correct. Okay. So I just thought they may reference the background document, but you won't have it on Monday. You will have it on Tuesday. Okay. That is the only thing in addition that I had to bring up. Mr. Dong.
Oh, I was just going to wish everyone a great weekend, but I think it was perhaps a little too early, but I want to thank everyone for their support on the motion.
Okay, duly noted, Mr. Dong. Seeing nothing else, I wish everyone happy holidays over the next 2 weeks, and we'll see you on Monday. Adjourn.